Hello and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by Caliber Mind. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm joined by Neil Cohen. Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello, and I'd like to say hi to your listeners. Camela, um, I call myself a marketing therapist. I've been consulting with companies, mostly startups, but a lot of big companies that your fans may have heard of for probably over 23 years. And before that, I used to sit in the hot seat as a marketing executive for companies like Hilton, Sega, Arby's, tool company called Zircon, amongst others. Did a couple of high-flying startups during the crazy early days of the internet. And so kind of been around the block a little.
I love it, and we're going to have a great conversation, and it's going to be all around diagnosing your marketing problem with the marketing therapist, as you said.
Yeah.
So, I'm excited. I think it was so interesting to talk through what you really enjoyed about consulting and why that really called to you. And I think it's a great intro to the rest of our
Yeah.
topic. Do you want to kind of share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think depending on where you are on your career journey, I think some of us, the older you are, the more you lean into or try to lean into what you love to do versus what you have to do. uh, yeah, when what I realized, on a personal level, is what I'm really good at is puzzle solving, problem solving, as well as kind of being a mentor teacher. And so, going from being, let's say, a CMO type or a VP of marketing type and running the whole show, you tend to be very focused on one idea, like the company. Like, sure, there's lots of things, but let's face it, everybody, you really only get to innovate in that role for maybe 6 months to a year, and then you become part of the problem. And people kind of you're the wallpaper, and that's why CMOs tend to have a short tenure at companies. So really just decided that consulting was a better place for me uh, because I could solve more puzzles and teach them how to fish and kind of move on to the next puzzle. And for me, that was the right way to do it. And I've loved doing it since I started. As I like to say, I'm unemployable now.
I disagree because the CMOs who may have bristled at becoming the wallpaper, it's human nature and it happens to all of us. I think when we're embedded in an organization and
Yeah,
we first really made the changes to the brand that needed to happen, it's really easy to get too close to everything and not have the objectivity we need to really continue to nurture and expand the brand because
yeah.
it's got to change all the time. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And market conditions change all the time. The market
Right.
reality from 6 months ago is different than the market reality today. I use one of the examples of back in 2008 when all the world was going into an economic, hell in a handbasket. Right? And Mercedes all of a sudden from being a luxury car to a value purchase. And then 3 years later, guess what? They're luxury again. So there's always these forces outside of your own company that people tend not to look at or reevaluate on a regular basis. And it's something that you should be revisiting often. And it's hard to do again when you're this close to it. When you're up against the wall and every day there's an emergency or a deadline or something coming from the top or something coming from the bottom or something coming from the sales team that diverts your attention. We tend to not take that pause. I have one of my Neolisms is don't just do something, stand there. And so I'm like, let's take a breath, let's gather where we are. And then, once we have all the information, let's figure out the best way forward. And there's lots of versions of that. Go slow to move fast, all those different kinds of things. And they might come across as cliche and platitudes, but they actually are really valuable if you do them.
Absolutely. And that's why you are so employable. So let's talk a little bit about maybe refreshing some of that objectivity and what is the best way you found to really evaluate your brand and maybe discover some things that you didn't know before? We're just going to
Well,
lob that softball at you.
well, it is kind of a softball, but gotta swing true, right?
Yeah.
So eh, I strongly believe, and I know we kind of share the same philosophy because we had a lovely chat last week, that, sure, marketing is good storytelling, but even deeper than that, marketing is empathy. And and empathy means really understanding your customer and their day-to-day pain. And so I'll often say to the startups that I work with or the big companies I work with, have you talked to your customers? And they often say that they do. Um, that said, it's how they're talking to them. For startups, and actually, again, big companies too, it's typically feature-based stuff like, what would you like to see? And what do you think of this feature? And isn't this is a great solution? And those are for the purpose of understanding pain, those are the worst kind of interviews. There's nothing wrong with those kind of things if you're a product person and you're doing UI UX and you're watching people and you're doing ethnographic studying and seeing how people react, and that's terrific, but this is a completely different thing. And so what you really want to do is take a step back and just be fully objective and drop all your cognitive bias that exists about your solution. Because what happens is that if you go in and you start talking to people about what you do and how you do it, you tend to sell. And then when you're selling is always defending and deflecting because the customer is always going to come back with you. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. In your mind, you're going like a crazy customer. Of course, my solution is the best solution ever. So the first thing, and I'll take a deep breath just for a second, is how do you um, uh, uh, gain that empathy? And so that's what I think we should talk to first, which is empathetic interviews. And then, and so let's talk about what those are and why they differ from everything else that people do.
I go back to your don't just do something, stand there.
Yeah,
Right. So,
right.
and I would disagree that if you're a product person, those are fine questions to ask. Having a really weird background and starting even in internships doing user acceptance testing
Yeah.
on, man, what was it? It was like a CAD design software. We were taught very early on, don't lead the witness.
Don't lead the witness.
Yeah. Yeah. So we brought you in because you're the kind of person who would use this product. What would you use it for?
Yes,
And
yes,
now I want to watch you try to do that thing.
yes, yes. I agree with what you're saying. And we tend to lead the witness and creating a discussion guide that doesn't lead the witness, but gives you the insights that you need is a tough thing to do. We talked about a couple of examples last week of if we went back 40 or 50 years ago and I was a compass company and you were an avid hiker and I asked you, hey, tell me what I can do to create a better compass. And you say, well, could you make it a little more accurate? Like maybe increase the number of bevels and maybe backlight it because sometimes I'm out at dusk or dawn and I need that and but you wouldn't tell me to launch 20 asynchronous satellites into orbit and give me a powerful handheld computer that was more powerful than we're putting a guy on the moon with. And you wouldn't tell me that because you don't know that. And so when you ask customers questions about what they want or what they need, they can only answer in terms of what they know because they don't know what exists or what's out there. It's the same thing with when the original MP3 players came out. And, Apple wasn't the first. There were others out there, but what the maker of those things knew is that we love portability. We loved having a wide variety of songs because we all, had the mixtapes or mixed, CDs, right? But we all were willing to sacrifice a modicum of sonic quality because of to be portable. So if you ask anybody, remember they had a Discman, and you go like, well, what would you like your Discman to do better? It's like less skipping. So I'd like it to be less crappy. I want it to not skip every 30 seconds, maybe every minute, right? So it's still a terrible experience. Well, that nobody said, hey, should we use a flash drive in the thing or should we use a, right? But what we knew is that you can use an MP3 file, which is less dense than other sonic files. And now I can do more storage on a simple flash drive. Okay, that's connecting the dots on the back end, understanding that I was willing to sacrifice a little bit of sonic quality, fidelity for portability. And by the way, indecipherable, right? But if you were an audio file, that could be a big deal, right? People, if I don't know if your gentle listeners remember, like people used to have these incredible sound systems at home, and now they come in like a little tiny Bose. You used to have speakers up to the ceiling and a tuner and a like all these sophisticated pieces. You don't need that anymore, right? But still, so how do you turn that into an empathetic interview? um, there's a couple of principles before we go through a questionnaire. Is first and foremost is the technique of listening to understand versus listening to reply.
And I'm shaking my head vigorously. Yes, yes.
And so for your fans out there that haven't heard that before, how many times have you been in the office or with a friend and you said like, hey, how was your weekend? And they said it was terrific. And you go, well, my weekend was terrific too. Like, let's go get a beer, right? Okay. That's listening to reply. That's not listening to understand. Why? Why wouldn't you say to your friend,
What'd you
uh,
do?
Camela, well, what did you do that was so great? And then when they say, oh, I went fly fishing with my dad, you go like, oh, you don't go, that's great. Let's go get a beer, right? You go, wow, I didn't know you fly fish. Tell me about that. How long you been doing it? So listening to understand is asking questions and not taking what you hear on the surface for granted, and not bringing your confirmational bias to the table. When somebody says a words like, well, you know what? We really are into innovation. Well, I have in my mind what that word innovation means, but you need to take a pause. It's like, something, I kind of have my own definition of innovation. Camela, please, when you say innovation within your organization, what do you mean when you say that? It could be buying outside companies that brings tech that you can't develop in. It might be insourcing innovation. It might be, I have an accelerator group and they bring, like, it could mean a bunch of different things. And so this whole idea of listening to understand, and not just replying or moving on is a really, really important technique for digging deep and having empathy.
I Yes, 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 yes. And I think my background in operations really served me well in developing this skill because so many people come to you with the solution. And this happens with customers too. Here are
Yeah.
the 5 features that I want to see. Or the marketing leader comes over, or the sales leader comes over, and here are the 3 KPIs I need to measure, and I need this by tomorrow.
Yes.
And the right thing to do next is, okay, let's slow down a little bit. What
Mhm.
question are you trying to answer? What
Yes.
what's driving this? And you just keep asking, and I think this is probably your next principle. I'm sorry,
Oh,
but
that's fine. Oh,
keep
it's
asking
perfect.
why.
Yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
asking why.
Yeah. And in product design, there's 5 whys in
Yep.
design thinking, and it's the same thing here, which is keep asking why until there's no more why to ask.
Yep.
Uh, and let's get into that interview. When you talk to people, again, there's lots of interview techniques. I always feel like the first 5 to 10 minutes of any empathetic interview has nothing to do with business. Where
Yes.
you're living, where you're from, tell me about your family. Oh my God, you do that. And again, digging deep, showing interest in people, because what you want to do is build a comfort level and you want to have them, the faucet flowing before you ask the big questions. You don't get right into it and say, boom. And that's funny too, because I got 2 journalism degrees, and they always taught us ask the most important question first. And I learned that in marketing, that's the worst thing you could do. But the reason they say that is because your subject might go away. Oh, no
Right.
comment, right, right. But here in our world, if you're sitting down, you got somebody to 30 to 45 minutes, you really want to get them talking and feeling comfortable with you, and having them sense that you're interested in them and their lives. And then you can say, wow, that's great. Well, and by the way, what happens is you can find a common ground. It's like, oh, you're from Florida. I was from Florida. Did you go to University of Florida? No, I went to UCF. Oh, great. We were rivals, like blah, blah, blah. Right. You can still have a lot of fun with those kind of things. But then when you start digging in, I always say start broad and work your way down. And,
Hmm.
my first question is just like, tell me about the day in the life of Camela. Like, you come into the office and what's a typical day like? And by the way, 100% of the time people say, oh, there is no typical day. My life is crazy. It's like, well, explain the crazy. Okay. Explain it to me. What do you do? Like, what happens? Why is that? Why is that? Why is every day a snowflake? Why is every day crazy? Tell me why. You want to know, do you report to, who do you report to? Do people report to you? What are your KPIs? How do you measure success for your job? Why are those measurements important? Why are they important to you? You know,
Maybe
uh,
they're not.
right,
Maybe they're
right,
not. And you're just,
right.
yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Right. Yeah, right. And so you're starting broad so that you can understand their life, and now you can start funneling down a little bit. You can say like, well, today I wanted to talk a little bit about marketing automation. Okay, whatever it might be. And you say like, tell me about your marketing automation and how you do it at your organization. And they'll start fairly broad, and you go like, oh, so how long have you been doing it that way? So on and forth. It's like, do you bring in new marketing automation tools? You do? Why? You don't? Why?
Hmm.
When was the last time you brought in a new one? How come it's been that long? Do you constantly evaluate your marketing automation? You don't? Why not? You do? Why? Right? What's your criteria when you do that evaluation? Explain that to me. How come those are important criteria? So when you decide to do it, how do you go about doing an RFP? Explain that to me. What are you looking for? How do you pick the companies that are going to come in? Right? Like, so notice I'm not leading, I'm asking them why. And then at one point I might get down because let's say you're a new AI plugin for marketing automation to help people find the best things or automate the process, because AI is big right now. Everybody's got an AI plugin, right? So, we talked about a lot of things. Are you considering AI for your marketing audit? You didn't mention that. Or they might have mentioned it. They said, oh, you're considering AI. How come? Oh, you
Hmm.
didn't mention AI. How come? Oh, okay, I understand now. I go like, and now you can get down into that very, very vertical stuff, still without leading the witness.
Yeah.
And now what you're doing is you're getting a lot of dots to connect. Yeah, now you understand their pain, their measurement, their day, what tools they're using, how they evaluate, how they don't evaluate, how often they change, what the food chain is, what the criteria is. I've just learned everything just by having an open mind and listening, and not saying like, I've got a better way for you to do this, or have you ever tried this, or have you ever tried that, or any of those kind of things, because it doesn't matter. I don't know if any of your listeners are using tools like Fireflies or Otter, but one
Hmm.
of my criteria for judging how well I do on an empathetic interview, and I do judge myself after I do them, is I look at how much I spoke versus how much the human I'm talking to spoke, because they'll show you like 80%, 20%, that type of thing. That's my line, 80%, 20%. If I'm talking more than 20% of the time, and actually 75 is my danger zone, right?
Yep.
If I'm talking more than 25% of the time, I consider that I didn't do my job well. So I try to keep it 20%, because that means I'm listening to understand, I'm not listening to reply, and I'm not throwing in my confirmational bias or my ideas into the process while we talk.
Agree to everything. Plus one. plus one. What I want to talk about a little bit though is so we've done these, we agree that we should regularly talk to our customers.
Yes,
And this helps us discover where we have gaps or areas of improvement to improve our brand, our product, everything.
right.
We do these interviews, we have some key findings that tell us that we should change certain aspects. How do
Right.
we sell that to the rest of the business?
Right. Yeah, and it's hard because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's got an opinion inside of a company. Like there's plenty of them outside of the company too. Especially if you're a venture funded company, then your VC's got ideas too. So first is like, how do you look at all this data? Like, hopefully you're doing like 5 to 10 interviews, and what you're looking for is patterns. You have this discussion guide, you're looking for patterns, you're looking for recurring themes. Easy to do manually. Now with a lot of these tools like Otter and Fireflies and some others, they do have great AI tools that if you structure your questions correctly. Now remember, you don't want to ask questions like, here's question one, here's question two. You want to have a conversation. But if you can architect the discussion guide in a way with keywords that you know that you're inserting, you can actually do fairly rapid summaries with all your interviews and say like, tell me the biggest pain points from the 6 interviews in channel, in that channel, right? And then it'll kind of summarize it for you. But I tend to still go in and human check. I'm not completely trusting yet. So go in and check, find the patterns, and then understand the depth behind those patterns. So that's the finding.
Yep.
That's how you go out and find the findings. And now you go into a meeting, and I think everybody will have been in the meeting where everybody's talking about ideas internally, and the words I think or I feel come up frequently. I think we should do this. I feel we should do this. Um, my technique for that all the time is twofold. First, listen to understand. Don't reply. Explain to me, Camela, why you feel or think that way.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand that. I'm not, don't come across as judgmental. I don't know about that. Explain to me how you feel about it. It's just like, hey, I'm all ears. Explain that to me. I want to understand your position. Now that you understand their position, I tend to kind of flip it a little bit sometimes. It depends on who I'm talking to. If there are certain folks like VCs, which have a lot of ideas and have a lot of I think I feels, I will say, well, I thought that same way too.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went out and talked to 15 customers. And
Mm-hmm.
what I learned is this. So because of what I learned and what we learned, this is the better way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Here's why. So now you're leading with facts and interviews, and you've also paid attention to what the other human has said to you
Yep.
and listened to them. Often that other human might have a good idea, in that thing, it buried in there. And so you might say, we went out and talked to interview, and while that thing didn't come up, that one thing that you talked about did shine, and that's part of our new direction or part of the new thing. So by listening and asking, you're able to pick up on things that you wouldn't if you just disagreed with the person outright. And here's the one thing, and in most organizations, when I used to teach, I used to throw the students together into random groups, and they hated it. They go, "Oh, how come I can't work with my friends?" I said, "Because when you graduate next year, you're going to be joining a company. They're not joining you, and you're going to work with whoever you're going to have to work with. So you're going to have to learn to do that now." And inevitably there would be fights in the group because remember when you're back in college, it's like, oh, that person's an idiot. They don't know. Like, but let's think about it. I'd ask the class, every class, I go, who wants to get an F on your group project? Of course, nobody raises their hand. A D, a C, a B. Nobody raises their hand, right? Who wants to get an A? Everybody raises their hand. I said, great. So I'm going to ask a question. When you're in your group and two of you start fighting with each other, why are you fighting? And inevitably, the light bulb goes on with everybody in the class is that they want to get an A. So you
Hmm.
want to get an A, they want to get an A. They think their idea is the A idea. You think your idea is the A idea. Start there. We both want to get an A, not with my idea is better than your idea. Okay.
Hmm.
If you start with a shared goal, then that's when you start again listening to understand versus listening to replying and saying, like, okay, I know you want to get an A. Explain to me why that's the A idea. Tell me what you're thinking and how you're thinking, and then let me explain your idea. And then typically what happened, and what always happened in the groups, is they come to a different answer, but a consensus. It's like, oh, that
Hmm.
is a good idea, but I don't know if that works. But here's my idea, and I don't know if that works, but maybe if we can combine them. Oh, the best ideas are ones that other people can make better, but you don't get there unless you listen. And so for people who are trying to convince other people in the organization, being a great listener is a great way to get people on your side.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about customer interviews and selling what we find in them, but
Yeah,
I'm thinking back to the best relationships I had with sales leaders as a marketing leader. And those were the relationships where we could have difficult conversations because we both knew we wanted the same thing. We wanted the
yeah,
company to succeed. We wanted the sales team to do really well.
right.
And if you can come to the table with the understanding that you're both ultimately just really trying to get to the same place and have good intent, it's a lot easier to listen.
Right. And I will tell your marketing folks out there, the sales folks that are listening are going to now stand up in their chair and applaud. If you're the marketers, your job is to enable sales,
Yeah.
right? At the end of the day, you sales is a customer. You're a marketer. You have to market to the salespeople, and I find very few marketers do this. They fight like there's this eternal, Venus and Mars between sales and marketing. It's been there forever. And part of the reason is that, that marketing thinks they're right, sales thinks they're right, and they fight over who's right versus tell me sales, what's going to allow you to do your job better? And I will say this now, the salespeople won't like me. The salespeople will always have something else they need, right?
Oh yeah.
If I
And they'll
just had
forget the
this thing,
last thing you gave them too.
right,
It's
right,
just how it is.
right, right. If I just had this one thing, I could have closed that deal. Okay, like so, but that aside, being able to listen to them and understand because they're going out there and they are facing the customers. So how do you give them the best advantage that you can? And it's done in collaboration and by listening. Like what are you facing out there? What are you hearing? I ask salespeople all the time that I work with, tell me what you're hearing. Is the story resonating? No, why not? Yes, where? Um, and if you can have an honest conversation with them, and if the marketers out there, you're not sitting in on sales calls on a regular basis, then you're not servicing the organization well. You know,
No.
and that could be also not just sales, it could be sitting on customer service calls or sitting in all those kind of things because marketing is supposed to be the voice of the customer, and so this is why you do these empathetic interviews. This is why you listen to customer service. This is why you sit in the sales process so you can better understand. But I think that eternal battle between sales and marketing is just for a lot of people, it's a waste of time. It's a momentum killer and it keeps you from being as successful as you might possibly be able to be successful.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we go back to the very beginning of our conversation where a lot of this comes from a lack of objectivity
Right.
and being too close to it. So if you're plus one, I agree with everything. It's great. Just ask more questions because story is old as time. We hear marketing complaining that sales doesn't follow up on leads and sales saying that marketing leads suck.
Yep.
And every single time, I guarantee you they're both right.
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
both right.
Yeah.
So the better conversation is tell me more. Tell me why. What happened? Let me know. Like let's figure this out. And a lot of times it can be solved by, oh, content syndication, too early in the funnel, not ready to have, we'll put
Right.
them in nurture.
Right.
You get down to this thing, a pattern that you start spotting. Yeah, these customer interviews, you can apply them anywhere. Oh,
Well, and it's funny because I'm working with a company right now where we're having very up close and personal events with potential customers, and they're going very, very well. But, a month or two later, they haven't closed. Well, of course they haven't closed because the sales process is still, 4 to 8 months, even though there's a sense of urgency around this product that they're selling. But the point is that we all know it takes a lot of touches. We all know it takes a bit of time. It's just what's the right way to assemble that process. So let's say with that client that I just talked about, we're still trying to figure that out, right?
sure.
Which is great. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and saying like, gosh, those events don't work or that didn't work. Like, look, if I could spend 3 hours talking to 6 customers and they're there on their own free will, that's a good touch.
Mm.
That builds trust, that builds camaraderie, that builds understanding. And hopefully if you're listening, you're taking those words that they're saying and then you're using those words to get more customers or get more people interested.
But I think what's also interesting about what you're saying is you're a student of the sales process. And by that, I mean you are listening and making sure you understand what's the average sales cycle? How long does this take? And then you can use that information to educate and say, we don't know how this is doing yet. Here are some early indicators,
Yes.
but you have a 12-month sales cycle.
Yeah.
So we can't definitively say this doesn't work yet.
Right. Right. Uh, you can though look to hopeful signs.
Absolutely. Early indicators. Yeah, yeah. Look how many
Right.
meetings we got and look how
Yeah.
many turned into opportunities, and those are still open. So,
Yeah, I used to have this chart about touches, whereas let's say you have a raging river and it's 50 yards wide, and you have 3 rocks across it. That one's 6 feet away, one's 20 feet away, one's 15 feet away. That's going to be a tough river to cross on those rocks. If I have 30 stones spaced out, even if it's not equally spaced across that river, I'm going to make it to the other side. Well, think of those as touches. Think of that river crossing, 3 rocks, it ain't going to happen. 30 rocks, I'm getting across there and my feet aren't even going to get wet. You have to kind of realize that it is a process, and I think we all know that. Are you, though, in that process, hitting the right notes? Are you listening? Are you bringing up the things that you're hearing? Are you evolving your message? I'm not saying change it. I'm not saying, revolution. I'm saying evolution. Again, a company that I'm working with right now, we know we're in the neighborhood. Like we started out in the right neighborhood. Everybody knew it, but we weren't on the corner where the bodega was. Okay, we're a block away here, a block away there. We're close. We're circling it, but we're getting closer and closer every day by listening. And we just hit on something the other day that we heard from a C-suite person, took it and kind of massaged it a little bit, used it in a pitch like a charm. Again, used our customers' words to
Mhm.
get more customers. I call it marketing jujitsu, and because if they've got that pain, somebody else probably has that similar pain or is visualizing it, the solution the same way.
Random thought, but man, this all ties together. So I was talking to somebody about being able to measure your brand. And this seems like this ethereal thing that we're just burning money on to CEOs.
Yeah.
And my whole conversation was it's possible because you should be continuously looking for incremental improvements, and those are always measurable.
Yes.
So like the sales deck, time to close, engagement,
Mhm.
number of next meetings hit, boom. You've just
Right.
proved that that branding change is absolutely worth doing.
Yeah. Well, and again, we're so focused so focused on performance marketing. I
Yes,
recently wrote an article about how the pendulum is swinging back to brand. I think all your marketing folks out there know that performance marketing is more expensive, so it's less efficient. You've got cookie deprecation, you've got other issues going on in that world. And I'm not saying performance marketing is net bad. It's a great thing, it's an important thing. But we also know statistically and proven that performance works best when it's supported by a strong brand.
absolutely.
You're not going to click on an unknown thing unless it's completely outrageous, and then you probably regret it anyway. Or at least it's making an impression, that performance marketing, so that you go to the website on your own or whatever the attribution might be, regardless. Uh, it comes back to the old adage, there's two famous ones, right? Not everything that you measure is important, and not
Yep.
everything that's important can be measured, which goes back to the old adage, half my marketing dollars are spent, are wasted. I just don't know which half.
Sure.
Uh, and certainly, CMOs and marketers getting called out on budget more and more right now, and there's much more accountability that's going on there. But the fact is that brand and performance are synergistic and go hand in hand, and you have to find the right balance. My guess is that most of the people out there are probably not doing enough brand. Uh,
Mm.
they're
Hmm.
not honing their message enough so that their performance marketing is hitting the spot.
Yeah, and what I'd love to point out, so I am definitely a data person. I am a numbers geek. However, I also understand that if we're not paying attention to brand and building something that's differentiated, special, evokes feelings with people, we can't get the numbers moving in the direction we need. So, for example, let's say we have a great product, terrible customer success, and our market reputation is not great. Those numbers aren't going to be good at all. So I think there's a healthy combination. But these customer interviews, if you're not paying attention to your brand and cultivating it and nurturing it, this is such a great way to get started.
Right.
And I love your call out that this has to be an intentional exercise that we're bringing into our marketing. So we can't be, the whole team has to be involved in figuring out ways to take this feedback and things we're learning and incorporating it into our brand and testing things out and then sharing what works,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can give you a short example of how it worked. I was working with a company. Uh, they were a legacy company in the digital rights management space. Not important. Switching their company over, new products that were more cloud-based. And they had a very nice message, but it wasn't resonating, and their performance marketing wasn't working. I mean, it was interesting. It was different for the category, but we went and talked to people, and what we learned is that they were close, no cigar yet, and we were able to take that message from a world of everybody knows security stops bad stuff from happening, and we flipped it on its head and said, like, but if you do it really, really well in this space, you can enable incredible things to happen. So we took the message, flipped it on its head a little bit, kept the essence of who they were. Well, what was the result of that campaign with that creative and that type of thing? They had they tripled the number of big logos in their pipeline. They tripled their actual pipeline. Considerably, right? And they were able to, by the end of the year, hit their numbers based on time to deal and all that kind of stuff, where they were kind of falling a little bit behind. And so just by going out and doing that exercise, just by honing that message enough and doing some performance marketing creative that was more on point, generated significant results that they might not have gotten otherwise.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Neil, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to tell the marketers out there?
Huh. Um, All I can tell is all the folks out in marketing right now is you are currently in a transformative time in not just marketing, but in history. We all hear the buzzy generative AI and is it hype or is it real? And I'm telling you, what I used to tell my students 15 years ago, like I stopped teaching just right when the pandemic hit, but they said, what should we do in marketing where I can command the most dollars? And at that time, I said, learn Marketo, learn HubSpot, learn performance marketing because you couldn't find really good people who were doing it at that time, and it was kind of just greenfield for people who would good and put their head down. As for example, there's somebody that I know that in within 7 years of starting their career are making over 200 grand a year. You know,
Sure.
right? So that's a lot of ditch for something. Well, generative AI is going to be that within the organization now. And I don't think it's going to replace jobs. I just think it's going to create new, better jobs. And so understanding that landscape, understanding how to work with it, understanding how to use it and prompt it and manipulate it correctly, safely, responsibly. If you can do that, you'll be way ahead. This is kind of transformational. I remember when I first started in my career, 1981, okay, when they put a laptop on my desk. It's like, what? Okay, so, and the people that didn't adapt got left behind.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, and so I would definitely say pay attention. It's not hype, it's real, but really understand it. Just because you got ChatGPT or Copilot doesn't mean you're good at it.
No, yeah, yes. If you're not taking the time to figure out how to enhance your productivity with AI now, you're going to lose to competitors.
Yeah.
And it's just how it is. It's
Well,
just how it is.
and look, I get all my best wisdom from Pixar movies. Remember Syndrome in The Incredibles. If everybody's super, nobody's super. If we all have the same tools, what's the differentiator? The differentiator is how you use them and manipulate them and leverage them and so on and so forth. So, getting back to animated cartoons, Kung Fu Panda, the secret ingredient is you, not the AI.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it. I
Yeah.
believe it.
Cartoon
Neil,
wisdom. You got it.
I love it. Neil, thank you for the master class. Where can people find you online to network?
And anybody, everybody who knows me, I respond pretty quickly on either LinkedIn, look for the marketing, Neil Cohen, marketing therapist on LinkedIn. And I actually have my Gmail on there. So like if you go to the contact info, you can email me direct and people know I tend to respond within a few hours as well.
I
And
can attest. Yes. Yeah, you're very responsive. Thank you.
yeah, nobody likes a black hole, to like, treat people like you want to be treated, right?
Yeah. Yep. Be kind.
Camela, this is so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I hope your fans out there enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to keeping our conversation going on a personal level.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the Revenue Marketing Report. Please tell 2 friends, subscribe, download, whatever you can helps. And for those of you looking for more great content like this, check out caliberbuying.com.